It was a peaceful, sunny afternoon in the village when Kim Dan was suddenly jolted by a familiar voice. He turned in surprise, and there they were, Heesung and Yoon-Gu, standing as if they had appeared out of nowhere. Heesung. Yoon-Gu? Kim Dan stammered, still blinking in disbelief as he tried to process this unexpected reunion. Heesung grinned widely, his usual ease never missing a beat. Well, we're here because I'm filming for a movie, he said casually. Yoon-Gu's just an extra for some action scenes. Kim Dan nodded slowly, trying to make sense of it all. Ah, I see, he replied, still processing the surprise. Yoon-Gu, grinning ear to ear, was practically glowing with excitement. It's been so long, Dr. Dan. I'm so happy to see you, he exclaimed as he eagerly shook Kim Dan's hand. Heesung chuckled, we're on a filming break, so we decided to go for a walk and check on the dog Yoon-Gu met yesterday. Kim Dan smiled, still a little surprised by the encounter. Is this your hometown? Yoon-Gu asked, glancing around curiously. Not exactly, Kim Dan answered, shaking his head. I'm just staying here for a while. Without missing a beat, Heesung wrapped both Kim Dan and Yoon-Gu in a warm hug. It's so great to see you again, Dr. Dan. I've really missed you, he said affectionately. Yoon-Gu, still beaming, added, and who would have thought the village dog was yours? What a coincidence. Kim Dan laughed softly, feeling the surprise fade into a comforting warmth. I'm just as surprised as you, he said with a smile. A thought suddenly crossed his mind. By the way, I've got a puppy too. Would you like to meet it? Yoon-Gu's eyes lit up at the mention. Really? Where is it? He asked eagerly. Kim Dan chuckled at Yoon-Gu's enthusiasm. It's a bit warm outside, so how about I grab us something cold to drink first, he suggested as he began to lead them toward his house. As they walked, the peaceful sounds of the village surrounded them, the distant chirping of birds, the rustling of trees in the soft breeze. Heesung inhaled deeply, his face relaxing into a smile. It's so peaceful here, he said, savoring the fresh air. It's really nice. Kim Dan smiled quietly, enjoying the serenity of the moment. I'm glad you came, he murmured, appreciating the calmness. As they walked along, Kim Dan raised an eyebrow. I have to admit, I didn't expect you and Yoon-Gu to get along so well. Since when did you two become such good friends? Heesung teased Yoon-Gu, who blushed slightly. It just kind of happened, Heesung replied casually. We clicked, I guess. Yoon-Gu smiled shyly. Yeah, it was easy. We just clicked, he said quietly. Kim Dan chuckled. I never thought I'd see the day. And now Yoon-Gu's acting too? Heesung smiled proudly. Yoon-Gu's a natural. He's great on set. Yoon-Gu flushed a little at the compliment, glancing at Heesung. Heesung's just being kind, he mumbled. But their reunion was short-lived as Heesung's phone buzzed, cutting through the light atmosphere. He looked at the screen. Ah, it's my manager. Yoon-Gu, we need to head back, he said reluctantly. Yoon-Gu sighed but nodded. All right, he said, clearly disappointed. Heesung stood up, stretching. We have to get back to filming, but we'll come visit again soon. Yeah, he said with a wave. Kim Dan smiled softly, waving back. Take care. But Yoon-Gu lingered a moment, turning back to Kim Dan. You go ahead, he said to Heesung, before looking back at Kim Dan. I need to talk to you about something. I'll be right back. Heesung shot Yoon-Gu a curious look, but Yoon-Gu just smiled and gestured for him to go ahead. Heesung shrugged and walked away. Once they were alone, Yoon-Gu's expression turned serious. Dr. Dan, he began, his voice quiet with concern. About that spray from Jaekyung's match. Everyone knows it wasn't you who did it. Kim Dan froze, surprised by the unexpected topic. What? He muttered softly, unsure of what Yoon-Gu meant. Yoon-Gu continued, his voice sincere, but filled with sympathy. Everyone at the gym knows the truth, even Jaekyung. He feels really terrible about it. The memory of that painful day hit Kim Dan like a wave, and his heart sank. I see, he murmured. Yoon-Gu smiled faintly. I'm glad to have you back at the gym, Dr. Dan. I was wondering. Would you consider coming back? Everyone misses you. Kim Dan shook his head gently, his tone firm yet gentle. Yoon-Gu, I really appreciate it, but I don't want to cause more trouble for anyone. Especially for Mr. Ju. I can't risk dragging anyone else into this mess, he said, his voice steady. Trouble? Yoon-Gu said quickly, don't say that. You didn't do anything wrong. Everyone would love for you to come back. Kim Dan sighed, his expression softening. I'd rather be here, he said, his voice calm but resolute. He looked at Yoon-Gu, his gaze serious, but, can we keep this between us? Don't tell anyone where I am, he asked quietly, his voice a whisper of vulnerability. Yoon-Gu nodded earnestly. I promise, Dr. Dan. I won't tell anyone. Kim Dan's heart lightened a little. Thank you, he whispered. Yoon-Gu gave a final nod before turning to leave. I'll come by again sometime. Take care, he said with a warm, reassuring smile. Kim Dan watched him walk away, a bittersweet feeling washing over him. Take care of yourself too, he murmured to himself, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Later, as Heesung's mind wandered back to a particularly tense encounter from the past, he couldn't shake the vivid memory. Heesung stood face to face with Jae-kyung, who was visibly frustrated. His hands clenched into fists, he grabbed Heesung by the shirt and growled, "Where's Kim Dan?" Heesung recoiled, momentarily stunned, but quickly regained his composure. What are you talking about? He snapped, trying to push Jae-kyung's hand away. Are you accusing me of hiding him? Jae-kyung's eyes narrowed, his voice thick with suspicion. Didn't Kim Dan come to see you? Don't try to hide it. Heesung's patience was wearing thin. I don't know where he is, he retorted, his voice sharp. Jae-kyung glared at him. You must know something, he muttered under his breath. Heesung, now growing frustrated, shot back, you really think I'd help him hide from you? Jae-kyung sneered, refusing to let up. Don't make me find out the truth, Heesung, he threatened. With his temper flaring, Heesung called over his shoulder, you think you can push me around like this, you scumbag? He tore through my place looking for Kim Dan, and then just stormed out, Heesung muttered to himself, still simmering with irritation. Turning to Yoon-Gu, Heesung became serious. I need you to promise me something. Don't tell Jae-kyung anything. If he and Kim Dan cross paths again, it's going to get messy. It's better if Kim Dan stays out of it. Yoon-Gu nodded gravely. You're right. It's better this way. Dr. Dan just wants peace. As Heesung reflected on everything that had happened, a dark thought crossed his mind. After everything Jae-kyung did, maybe he deserves a little pain. He deserves to suffer for what he did. Later that night, after a long day of filming, Yoon-Gu suggested visiting Kim Dan. We don't have any shooting tonight, right? He asked with a mischievous grin. Heesung smiled. Nope, all clear. What's on your mind? Yoon-Gu's eyes sparkled with excitement. How about we visit Kim Dan? Bring him some food, make it a fun evening. So, the two of them arrived at Kim Dan's house later that night, carrying food, wine, and chicken to share. We finished early, so we thought we'd visit again, Heesung said cheerfully. Yoon-Gu added with a grin, we brought the good stuff, rice, wine, and chicken. Hope you haven't eaten yet. Kim Dan smiled warmly, their presence bringing a sense of lightness to his heart. As they gathered around, his grandfather joined them, and for the first time in a long while, Kim Dan felt his spirits lift as they laughed and sang together. But even amidst the joy of the evening, Kim Dan couldn't shake the weight in his chest. In this moment, I'm at ease, but why does my heart still feel so burdened? He wondered, his thoughts drifting back to the unresolved pain of the past.